You're going to find that we are invited to speak because people haven't the foggiest idea of how to read the ballot amendments or how to make a decision on them. They really want our help in voting. So let's keep that in mind. That doesn't mean we push lead positions, but we make it understandable so that they can make an intelligent decision. Let's talk about ballot amendments, and let's talk about the Constitution in general. The Florida Constitution is this document. The U.S. Constitution is this document. It's a good way to start, isn't it?
Yes.
Why? The U.S. Constitution has how many amendments? 27. The Florida Constitution, written in 1968, has 129. Okay? The U.S. Constitution, we know Amendment 1 to 10 of the Bill of Rights, and the rest are clearly delineated to number 27. We've had one repeal. Anybody old enough to remember that? Okay. Prohibition. Okay. The Florida Constitution, you will not see the list of 129. They're embedded in the wording of the Constitution. Now, anything embedded, to get it out, you have to remove it through another constitutional amendment. So you better be careful what you put in. We have some very strange things in our Constitution. Anybody remember the pregnant pigs? Remember those? We had a lot of animal lovers that felt very sorry for pigs that were gestating, that were kept in cages. So they put in the Constitution a prohibition against caging gestating pigs. We don't have any pig farms in Florida anymore. So there it is in the Constitution. And we have to get it out. How do you get it out? I'm going to tell you a couple of things. I'm going to tell you what makes a good Constitution, and I'm going to tell you the ways we get things in and get things out. And I think people will appreciate knowing that, because then they realize that when they vote something in, there's always a possibility it may have to come out someday. What must a good Constitution be? And what is our national Constitution? It's a series of rules and positions that aren't specific. They're general, and you interpret from them. Okay, a good state constitution must not conflict with any provision of the federal constitution. That makes sense. It should be simple, understandable, and an integrated statement of the basis of law, free from obsolete and statutory detail, a flexible instrument, free from unsound limitations, binding upon the legislature. Can you all hear me, or do you want me to use a mic? Okay, got good loud voice. Okay, it should have clearly defined lines of authority and responsibility. It should provide for a representative legislature based essentially on population with self-executing reapportionment. It should establish a uniform system of courts. It should establish state standards for finance and taxation that meet the requirements of a modern society. That means it doesn't have to say what you tax, to either eliminate or to add, but say that the state has the power to tax, which is what the federal government has as well. It should provide for a merit selection system for the selection and retention of state personnel. It should provide for meeting the increasingly extensive social and economic problems that affect the general welfare. I guess we're not originalists. It should provide for a system of free public education with equality of opportunity for all. And it should include an amendment process so that you can amend it. Florida has more ways to amend the Constitution than any other state. We have 5 ways. I'm going to let you guess at a couple of them. Name one.
Constitutional Revision Commission.
The Constitutional Revision Commission, which meets once every 20 years. No other state has this. We are going through this process this year. It is only the 3rd time that we've used it. And in that time, the number of votes you need to pass something proposed by the Constitutional Revision Commission has changed. It used to be a simple majority. By constitutional amendment, it was raised to 60%, and this is the first time everything has to pass by 60%. Now that doesn't mean 60% of people who voted in the election. It's 60% of the people that vote on the item. Okay? Remember, a lot of people leave them blank. Okay. So that's one way. Another way.
Legislature.
What?
Legislature.
State legislature. The state legislature has the right to put on the ballot anything it wants. It used to not have any limitations on wording, and we've seen in our years here constitutional amendments that could cover a whole page, and we really consider them kind of voter suppression measures because people aren't going to read that much. In fact, one of the things I was reading this week said they tried to measure how smart you have to be to understand what the ballots are. And it said it required 20 years of education to understand the ones that are on the ballot this time. Now, we may have it, but you know the average person doesn't, right? Okay, another way?
Citizen.
Say it again? Citizen petition. Citizen petition. We ran around for many years with citizen petitions. We did it on redistricting, we did it on the Amendment 4. What a lot of effort. You need an awful lot of signatures. Hard to get, expensive. What a way to do it. Okay? Is there another way? The tax commission that meets every 10 years. We have used all of those. The one that we've never used is a constitutional convention. We could, you know, even the federal government is allowed to call a constitutional convention. We better be pretty wary of what's going on here now. We have never called another one in Florida. So there are 5 ways to get them on, which gives us a lot of choices, but a lot of things to think about how they got on. Okay, so you know the ways. So that kind of gives you a background of how these things got there. Now let's go into the specific ones that we have now. You have your list here. There are 1, 2, 3 that were put on by the legislature. Can you pick out the 3 that were put on by the legislature? Number 1, number 2, and number 5 were put on by the legislature. 2/3 vote of both houses of the legislature. Would you assume that the majority party would have the votes? So you have to assume that they put it on for a reason. Okay? 3 and 4 were by petition. One petition was, number 4 was the felons' rights petition. The casino gambling was number 3. Who do you think sponsored the casino gambling?
Disney and the Indians. Native Americans and Disney.
The Seminole Indian tribes and Disney. They paid for the whole thing. I looked up the financial reports that they had. At least $20 million from each group. Okay. Was this a thing to change the Constitution? Or might you want to think of it as a business proposition?
Yeah, right.
So you have to look at where it's coming from and why. Why are we being asked? Is it a moral question or is it a business question? Okay. Number 5 was put on by the legislature. What it does, basically, is limit the ability of the elected legislature to control the finances of the legislature. The only job the legislature has to do is prepare a budget and pass it. A budget means spending money, but it also means you have to raise money. If you severely squeeze what you can raise, how can you ever spend? You have to think about it. In other words, they're saying that you elect legislators, and 2/3 of them have to agree to raise a fee, a tax. Notice there's no 2/3 to get rid of anything. That they're very happy to do.
Why would they put that on? It's making their...
They're tying their own hands.
Yes, why would they?
Because they have a philosophy of smaller government.
Some have
Make it so small and ineffective you can flush it down the sink, you know.
Right.
So you've got to figure out what was the meaning behind it. You can't be strictly clinical and say, if we vote for this, it means that 2/3 of the legislature must approve it. And if you vote against it, it means you don't have to have 2/3. That's not a sufficient answer to me. The answer is, the philosophy of why this was put on is to decrease the amount of money available to the state. And a very interesting group of former legislators that are opposing every single one that the Constitutional Commission put on, saying you're tying the hands, and especially with that one too, you're tying the hands of future elected legislators. Let's go through number 1, which is the increase in the homestead exemption. The homestead exemption in Florida, it eliminates the first $50,000 of assessed valuation, not including the school part of it, from taxation altogether for people that own their own homes. Okay. Now they want to further give a tax break for people whose homes are valued between 100 and 125. They've skipped over 75 to 100. If your home now goes to 100 to 125 and you're homesteaded, you get another 25. That's 75 maximum. Okay. Do you know what other states do? They don't do this at all. Why should you be paying a different rate than your neighbor next door, whose home is exactly the same, but they've been there longer? Most people, houses are taxed on market value. And then you usually get some kind of a break when you have a state income tax. Not in Florida, because we don't have a state income tax. We give it directly, so that my house and my neighbor's house can be taxed entirely differently depending upon when we bought it.
Or how many times
Okay?
it was sold.
And whether it's a second home or not. So they're giving another tax break. What is the effect of this? The effect of giving another tax break takes nothing out of the coffers of the state, but it takes it out of the counties. The county of Palm Beach will lose millions of dollars in an economy where the value of homes is increasing. We're now not taking advantage of that, but getting less money. For services, do you care about libraries? Do you care about school? It's not the schools, the libraries, the roads, the sheriff's department. Everything else that you need is covered by the property tax. The state sales tax goes to the state to spend. But the property tax is what you raise locally to spend on what you need locally. You are now reducing that. So remember, you may get a couple of $100 in your pocket, but you get less services.
I think it's 119.
Right, and it's entirely possible that your county then can raise your millage rate. So you can't be short-sighted about it. Okay, the second one is related to the property tax as well. We have a different scheme for people who are not homesteaded. If you own a second home, if you own places that are being rented, if you own a business, you're taxed at market value, and they're saying that your rate can't go up more than 10%, but that had a date at which it expired. That's this year. So they're saying, let's keep it that way forever. You're limiting, again, how much money you get from people who are not homesteading. Now, don't tell me that a person that has a second home can afford a property tax. It's just not reasonable. So that you're taking more money out of the county. Why does the state legislature sponsor two bills like this, two changes this year? It's politically popular. Who doesn't want a tax break? They think they will curry favor with the voters, who will not worry about the consequences down the road. That's basically their thinking. Now, how we explain it to people who always want to save money in their pocket, but I think Palm Beach County people are so amazing. They have been willing to tax themselves for schools and do that, but we shouldn't have to do it if the state provided properly. Anyway, so those are the first two. So you understand why they're there, and that they will actually cut the income for services required at the county level. Now, casino gambling. Every single year, the legislature is faced with, shall we expand casino gambling? They're kicking the ball down the road by saying, we don't want the responsibility of making the decision on this. We'll put it on the voters. It's not going to cost a great deal of money. It's not a moral issue. You're satisfying two lobby groups. Disney, that makes enormous contributions to political campaigns, and the Seminole Indian tribes that have a right by federal statute to have gambling. And they should be compensated for all that we did to them. It's only fair. But they don't want any competition. So they're saying, if you vote yes on this, you are taking the responsibility off the hands of the legislature to make a decision for which they were elected to do, and making it a public decision. And that public decision can only be by a citizen's initiative, collecting petition signatures to get it passed. Number 4. Do I really have to explain number 4 to anybody? We're off with that. That was a true citizens' initiative from the grassroots. They did it on the dime, you know, as little money as they could spend. The ACLU put up most of the money for it. It's something the League has long supported, and I can't see how we're ever going to get away with saying this came out of nowhere. It came out of the League, and it came out of the ACLU. Okay, so number 4, I don't have to talk about that one. You'll explain it when you go to talk about it. Okay. The tax increase that requires a supermajority. We kind of went over that one already. It says, tie my hands. Don't let us vote for any tax increases, even though we have climate change, we have algae, we have all kinds of problems, but there'll be no money for it because, after all, we have to get almost total agreement in order to do it. So they're tying their hands. That's that. Now, the crime victims' rights. Now we go into that whole group that was put on by the Constitutional Revision Commission. There is a group that established itself this week. If you're going to speak on this, you have to follow the news on a daily basis. I wake up in the morning and the first thing I do is go to my computer and find out what happened in Florida this morning, and you're always surprised. A candidate was removed from the ballot this morning. Another lawsuit was filed this morning. I mean, it's unbelievable. And then I come in here and find out news that I missed, right? On the national level. But I'm concerned with the Florida level. So there we are. The work of the Constitutional Revision Committee. Let's talk about that. A lot of you were at the hearings that the Constitutional Revision Committee had. We testified. I believe you testified. We were on their tails from day one. This was a Constitutional Revision Commission that was not balanced politically. It got there because the appointments were made by the head of the Senate, the head of the House, the governor, and 3 by the Supreme Court. You had a small minority of people from the party least represented in the Florida legislature. They also chose people that didn't have expertise in constitutions. You would have expected that a responsible group would go to the colleges and say, you have experts in constitutional law, would you please lend us a few to do this job? Let's go through it with a fine-tooth comb and correct what's wrong. No, they came in with a political agenda. And what they did was try to sweeten the pot. They came in with about 37 items that they wanted to do. And we sat through hearings where some very good suggestions came from the public. It's like they didn't hear a thing.
Right.
How many sat at those meetings? Did they hear anything we said?
No.
No. First of all, they appointed people sitting in the legislature and started their meetings when the legislature was in session. They didn't clarify their rules before the first meeting, or ever, actually. And they went with a political agenda. They didn't have experts come in and tell them how to run a constitution. So they all bought their pet favorites to get done. And they figured maybe they could pull the wool over people's eyes by combining things that had nothing to do with one another, but maybe you liked one of them. I mean, for years people have been talking about increasing the age at which judges can serve. That would be a good thing. But when you add it to something else, all of a sudden that doesn't look so good anymore. Because what you're getting is something worse with it. You know, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, right? That's what they're trying to do. So they combine them. So this group that established itself this week of former legislators said, even if everything they proposed was something we might want, putting them together and not letting people make an individual decision about each is the wrong way to go about it. Don't credit them. Vote no on all of them. Now the league isn't going to be happy with that position because they picked out one. And believe me, I believe with all my heart that we should eliminate offshore drilling in Florida. Well, what's that got to do with vaping? So you're going to end up with vaping in that you're sooner or later going to have to take out because it won't be popular or fashionable anymore. And it'll go away. And you can turn out the baby with the bathwater. So this group is saying, and what surprised me, they were amongst conservatives that have served in state government, but before this era, you know, reasonable conservatives, said the whole process is flawed, and they've gone to court to get them eliminated. 2 already have been removed from the ballot, but are subject to appeal. We may have 6 removed. We were sitting the other day and trying to figure out how are we going to do our voter guide. We have to get the material in. And we decided we're going to put them all in if we don't know by the 4th. And then as it comes up, we're going to have to write across it, remove from ballot. That will tell you a little bit about how our government is really being run. So there's a general objection to bundling them together. That is one objection. Not to say that some of them are bad ideas altogether, but there are a couple of good ideas in there. No question about it. Okay, let's go to
6.
we're going to go to the next one, which is crime victims' rights. Okay.
Which number are, sir?
Did you ever hear of Marcy's Law?
6.
Okay. There has been discussion amongst people who deal with crime and with victims that maybe the victims don't get enough of a break and that we care more about the perpetrators to give them their rights. Part of this proposition says that you're entitled to a speedy trial, but it limits the number of appeals. Do you know how many times Florida has had to reverse judgments against a victim, against a perpetrator that turned out to not to be true? So by limiting the appeals, you limit the time to develop evidence. Now, there's no doubt that both should be treated fairly, and we have plenty of laws that do it. You know, when you look at these things, you look at them and say, a lot of these could just be laws. They don't have to be in the Constitution.
Exactly.
Why are they putting them in the Constitution?
Exactly.
You know, because they have some popularity generally. They, you know, people are sympathetic to victims. There's no question about it. But you've got to balance the rights of the victim with the rights of those that are accused.
Exactly.
You know, guilty, innocent until proven guilty. And with rights of appeal. We have executed people who later turned out to be not guilty.
Right.
I mean, and wouldn't it be nice if we had one in there that eliminated the death penalty?
Right.
That you're not going to get.
Right.
Okay, so that basically is and the judges. So you've got crime victims' rights, and you put in there increase the terms of judges so that they can retire at 75. I mean, that might be nice, but look what you get with it. Survivors, benefits, colleges, and universities. That is quite a mouthful over there. What they're saying is they want colleges to have to vote a supermajority in order to raise fees.
Huh.
Okay, that's one of it. They also want to give first responders and military members, survivors, rights to free college tuition. They've got that in there. Why does this have to be in a constitution? Don't you wonder? And establishes a state college system. The state universities are in a college system, and now they want to put the state colleges in the system as well. 3 things that have nothing to do with each other, all proposed in one. That's that one. Now, ballot 8, number 8 was removed from the ballot. That's the one that everybody got exercised about because it supported charter schools, basically. Remember when we said about what should be in a constitution? That it should provide for public schools? This encourages charter schools. What it does is take away the right of the county board of education from overseeing the charter schools on which we spend public money. It also includes term limits for school board. Term limits are never a good idea. I want you to know the league is opposed to term limits in all its forms. You throw out the baby with the bathwater there too. You get people that are experienced and you just turn them out. Now, everybody says, but you get rid of the bad apples too. We do have natural term out limits. They're called elections.
Right.
You can always get rid of somebody if you want to. Okay, so that is the survivor benefits, school board, offshore drilling and vaping.
Now,
We really
just-
discussed that.
If I may, just one question. Now, that one has been removed at this point, but it is.
But it's on appeal.
Under appeal. And
They have to have an answer by the 4th
Okay.
of September. What's vaping? It said that you cannot have indoor, it's like indoor smoking. The same requirements that you have for cigarettes in a public place of accommodation will be for vaping. So having the two together is pretty silly. It's saying everybody whose heart is bleeding over offshore drilling, and the league fell for it, I think. They said, we care so much about this environmental issue that we're willing to close our eyes to the process. There's merit to that argument,
Yeah.
you know, and that's up for us to decide. Your league membership does not guarantee your vote, but it just suggests it, okay? Now, Broward County immediately sued to overturn number 10. What it does, it's really weird. In Florida, every county has the right to determine whether its constitutional officers are elected or appointed. In Palm Beach County, we elect our constitutional officers. Who are the constitutional officers? The supervisor of elections, the property appraiser, the tax collector, the sheriff, and the public defender. Okay. Some of them, now we have chosen whether they should be nonpartisan. Some are. We have chosen to elect them, but some on a partisan basis, some on a nonpartisan basis, and we have never gone for term limits on those, thank goodness. Okay. Other charter counties have chosen different ways of doing it. But the state would not like to interfere with the way the counties run their government. Miami-Dade does not elect certain of its people. They consider them, and when you think about it, some of these jobs are professional jobs. They require professional expertise, not political expertise. So you wonder why they should be elected offices. Broward and Miami objected strongly to this, and they sued. And that's under advisement as well. So they're going to try to get rid of that. Then they put in a January starting date for the legislature. Well, in presidential election years, the legislature often, I know I'm going over the time, right? The legislature often moves its starting date of the legislature so it doesn't interfere with the presidential primary. This is, and it can be done legislatively. There is absolutely no reason to do it constitutionally. So why they put it in is beyond my comprehension altogether. And why they did it for every second year, even numbered years, since there's no primary in the spring at all, hardly makes any sense. But that's what they put together. Okay? So it's a mishmash of things put together. Now, number 11. Okay. We now know that the Constitution is full of things that shouldn't be there. And every once in a while, we really should look and get things out. And a couple of years ago, one of the items that is in this group of 3 was proposed as an amendment to get out. Nobody understood what it was all about. None of the ones that are proposed are actually being used. They're obsolete. But the objection is that all 3 are put together. And you should be able to vote for each one individually. Now, the first one, to give you an example of what it is,
So they're all
at the
considered?
turn of the century, I feel like I was almost born then, there was this thing called the Yellow Peril. People were very afraid that the Asians that came here to build the railroad would stay, would buy up territory, and would kind of take over the US. California was the most worried. So a lot of states put into their constitution that you couldn't sell land to people who were not eligible for citizenship. They made them ineligible for citizenship. Nobody does this today. That is one thing they want to repeal. They did put that in a number of years ago, and it got voted down because nobody explained it properly. It's a little hard to explain what we meant 100 years ago. And that was picked up when the Constitution in 1968 was revised and the new Constitution was written. And the other two, one is the railroads. Now, we were here in the time of what do you call it? Railway. That we wanted high-speed railway. And it didn't happen, and we didn't do it, and now they want to take it out. The other one on criminal charges is interesting too, and it's something that we probably would want given on its own. It says that you cannot be exonerated for a crime that you committed even though the law that made that no longer a crime.
Oh my God.
So it doesn't go retroactively back. In other words, if you were convicted of something that was a crime on the date you did it, you could not be exonerated. And we would love that, wouldn't we? But the fact that all three are together is what's stopping that from going through. Anyway, so that was the other. Now the other one is lobbying restrictions. We know that ex-legislators, and in part because of term limits, when they get out, they feel they have the connections to lobby.
Right.
Now, most of them do it right the day after they're released from their duty as a public servant. But there should be some period of time. Well, the argument became, should it be 6 years or should it be less? That's what this one is all about.
So what do they say? What do they say like, on
And
the?
it says 6 years. You have to be out of office 6 years. And there is some concern that it affects not just people who served in office, but people who served in government generally. Dog racing one also was removed from the ballot. Okay. The dog racing one is basically the animal lovers and the greyhound people. The Greyhound Association sued, and they got it off the ballot temporarily. It's going to be appealed. Because what they said was, although you were not allowing greyhounds to run in Florida, you could still bet on greyhounds through screens at their places that are running in other states. It wasn't pure. Number 6 is being challenged. Number 8 is being challenged. Number 10 is being challenged. Number 13, and I think there are 2 more. And now there are a couple more. Nothing is decided yet. They're off, but they might be on again. But how many of you want to speak on this and feel you can keep up with this? Every morning something's going to change. Be prepared for it. But that's the fun of the game. Because the state has consistently favored charter schools and shortchanged public schools, the public schools of Palm Beach County are asking for a temporary additional assessment to pay teachers an increase. This is the thing that everybody is asking for. A raise in teacher salary. We're way at the bottom of the list. And they would like to do that. They would like to keep the teachers that are teaching arts. And the only way they can do it, since the state has cut money continuously from what their share, is to ask the public to raise. Now, the last time they did it, they put a penny sales tax, and they got half. The school board got half, and the county got the other half. And it runs out at a certain time. It has a date finite. This one does have a date finite as well. It's asking for it to a date finite, to increase teacher salaries, to keep art and music in the schools. And now they have a requirement to fulfill the safety regulations because of the shooting. So they don't have the money for that. So they're going to have on the ballot. So far, no group has opposed it. I'm happy to say, and our league is supporting it. You should know that. So that just gives you a brief. Now, how are you going to get any of this into 20 minutes? But the point is, you have to be able to answer questions on it as to why it got there. You can go through fairly briefly, and maybe you'll have fewer to do. But you should be able to understand what was in back of it, and not just cut and dry, this does this and this does that, okay? How many are willing to speak on that? I'm just glad to. We got it through. That's wonderful. Wonderful. So your first assignment is to watch the news every morning. Okay? And the best place is Safety Review. Did you ever go out to Safety Review? SAYFIE. SafetyReview.com. And then there's the Fort Report.
Spell again.
SAYFIE Review.com. And the Fort Report. FORT Report.com. Now, what that does, it combines all of the newspapers in Florida. It gives you all of the editorials, all of the news articles. It combines everything in Florida. This is no Florida paper, right? We get one little segment of it when we read the Post or the Sun Sentinel. This gives you overall Florida, what's happening.